Greeting and salutations. I am Lloyd, a producer at LCD Productions, and I have come to share this new series of visual audiobooks with you, the listener, the supporter, the viewer. Together we will go on a journey like never before, fly to new heights with Project Aerospace, explore new land and cityscapes with quotations, even change the dimension of time through the power of time-lapse photography from live to tape. We'll even travel beyond the mind's eye into worlds captured and generated through animation from Thumbs United daily animation series. As we together go on these journeys filled with photography and theater of the mind, I hope you remember the core belief that we hold, that anyone can become the master of art, meaning that it is not some born skill what makes someone good at being creative. It is a desire to practice and spend time being creative that creates the master. I hope that these films, photography, and stories inspire you to set some time aside and practice some creativity. I believe if we all spend more time creating and being constructive, the world would be a better place, a more friendlier and fulfilling place. Thank you for coming. Let's begin this journey. Chapter 6 Z64 Scores. Count Carl von Zingzing was certainly the first away. Typically pyrotechnic, he succeeded in throwing dust in the eyes of his rivals, acting upon the principle, do others or they'll do you. He was... Hold on. He was leaving no stone unturned to pull off the big prize, and figuratively speaking, a good many of stones were too dirty for a clean sportsman to handle. For one thing, von Zingzing had obtained his airship by fraud, although none of the other competitors were aware of the fact. Formerly in the German air service, the Count managed to smuggle one of the Zeppelins out of the shed of Tondern, taking it by night to an aerodrome in East Prussia. According to the terms of the peace treaty, Germany was to surrender all their airships. How she evaded this stipulation is now well known. The Zeppelins at Turin and other air stations like Schleswig-Holstein were destroyed by fire deliberately, to prevent them falling into the hands of the Allies. This act of bad faith was similar to the scuttling of the Hun fleet at Scapa, and the tardiness of the Allies to obtain reparations merely encouraged the Huns to other acts of passive defiance. But although the destruction of the airships was taken as an acceptable fact, it was unknown outside certain junker circles that one of the Zeppelins had been removed before the conflagration. Revolutions and counter-revolutions in which the fire-eating von Zingzing had several narrow escapes from death led the Count to seek pasture anew, and about the time the publication of M. Chauvet's terms of the international contest suggested, the Junker Count the possibility of making good his financial losses. Gathering a crew of airmen who had experience in Zeppelins during the war, von Zingzing flew the airship to Spain, crossing Austria and the north of Italy during the night, and carefully avoiding French territory on his aerial voyage. In a secluded part of the mountains, Extremadura, he had practically his own way. The acolytes of the nearest surrounding village were easily bribed to leave the mysterious airship and its foreign owners severely alone. From the stories of German war materials sold to Spain, von Zingzing obtained gas cylinders, petrol spares, and even a baby albatross, a small yet powerful monoplane, with folding wings. This machine could, with ease, be stowed away in the car of an airship. With German thoroughness, the Count, looking well ahead, foresaw that the albatross would probably serve a more useful purpose in helping him to win the coveted prize. The honor of being the first man to fly round the world, quite a subsidiary place in von Singzing's plans. Since Germany did not own a square inch of territory outside of Europe, he was compelled to make use of the alien lands in which to alight. That was a handicap, and the thought of it rankled. There was some consolidation to be derived from the prospect of wresting the big prize from the hated Englishman, a despised Yankee, or a miserable Japanese, as he meant to do it somehow. Already Germans had resumed their peaceful penetration of the Great Britain and the United States. Commercial travelers representing German houses at the same time potential spies were able to ascertain with little difficulty particular concerning the British and American competitors for the round-the-world flight. The moment von Singzing learnt of the date of Sir Reginald Forsyth's departure from England, he anticipated the time by starting the day before the British airship was supposed to leave Gibraltar. This was comparatively easy matter. According to the terms of the contest, competitors had to obtain a clearance certificate from an official of the International Airway Board. Provided the flight were completed within 20 days of the date the certificate, the principal condition was complied with, while it was furthermore specified that the certificate could be post-dated to the extent of 12 hours to allow for the time taken up in transmission from the board representative to the actual competitor. In von Singzing's case, he scored again. Employing a swift motor car, he obtained the official visa at Madrid and was back at the rendezvous within 2.5 hours, the atrocious roads notwithstanding. Everything was in readiness, and then at 10 in the morning, Z-64 left her shed and, flying at a comparatively low altitude, made off in the southeasterly direction. The German was counting on 48 hours start of his English rival, possibly more. He had been informed that the Golden Hind proposed leaving England on the following Monday. Forsyth really meant to have started on that day, and only the exuberant demonstration of the crowds outside Air Grange made him alter his plans. It was a lucky stroke, but Fordyce's secret intelligence department was at fault. According to information received from Germany, Count von Singzing was a non-starter. Incidentally, it was the Count who had set that rumor afloat. It was but one of the many petty artifices upon which he built his hopes of carrying off the Chavez prize. Chuckling to himself, Count von Singzing stood beside the helmsman of the Z-64, quite ignorant of the fact that a few thousand feet above him was the British airship which he fondly thought was resting in her shed in far-off England. Chapter 7. Delays. "Avast stunting," declared Forsyth. "Let's get on with it. Full speed to Gibraltar." Everyone on board realized that every minute was precious. With her 6 motors running all out, the Golden Hind quickly worked up to her maximum speed of 180 miles an hour. At that rate, the petrol consumption was alarming, but Forsyth faced the fact cheerfully. While he was obtaining the necessary certificate and making an official declaration to the authorities at Gibraltar, the airship would replenish her somewhat depleted fuel tanks. But Sir Reginald had not taken into account the vagaries of red tape and petty officialdom. At 11 a.m., the Golden Hind sighted the historic rock. 5 minutes later, she slowed down and turned ahead to the winds off the west side of the fortress. With the assistance of the dockyard mooring party, a stout galvanized steel wire was lowered from the bow compartment and the fuselage secured to a large mooring buoy off the detached mole. Then, with sufficient gas in her bayonets to keep her buoyant, the Golden Hind floated head to winds at 50 feet above the Bay of Gibraltar. Almost before the mooring operations were completed, the water in the vicinity was crowded with boats of all sorts and sizes and descriptions, while the waterfront was packed with a dense concourse of interested spectators, representatives of the umpteenth nationalities to be found living on the few square miles of thickly populated rock. Nothing you want to ashore, I suppose? Inquired Forsyth as he prepared to descend the wire ladder, the end of which was being steadied by a couple of bluejackets in a picket boat. No, thanks, no, replied Kenyon. That's good, continued the baronet fervently. Hate having to execute commissions. Not that I don't like obliging people, but I'm so dedusive forgetful. Righto, stand by. I'll be back in less than a couple of hours, I hope. Come along, Branston. Agilely, Forsyth swarmed down the swaying ladder, followed at the safe distance by Peter. Agilely, Forsyth swarmed down the swaying ladder, followed at a distance by Peter, who carried a parcel of documents and a Mercado's chart, on which proposed route was marked for the benefit of the International Air Committee's representative, and also the competent military authorities of the various garrisons where the Golden Hind was scheduled to land. Peter Branston had plenty of experience of officialdom at the Air Ministry. He well remembered the time running into hours all told of weary waiting in draughty corridors until it pleased certain individuals holding high places to signify their condescension, conveyed by a part damsel in brown overalls and pigtails tied to an enormous bow, to receive the insignificant lieutenant. Here it was much the same. The officials who were considered indispensable in the matter of signing various documents were out to lunch. A look of horrified amazement overspread the features of the minions, to whom Forsyth suggested that time would be saved by sending for them. The British Empire might totter, the chance of winning fame by being the first airman to fly around the globe be lost, but by no possible must the trivial details prevent officialdom from having its lunch, a movable feast occupying normally from 1 o'clock to 3. Hang it all, Branston, exclaimed Forsyth explosively during one of the numerous periods of forced inaction. Clearly, the usual unruffled baronet was showing signs of annoyance. Hang it all, it was all ever thus. Pretty hirelings, whose one idea of efficiency is to raise obstacles and to quibble over unimportant details. Those are the stumbling blocks. For 2 pennies I cut the crackles and carry on. And be disqualified at the winning post, reminded the cautious Peter. We're wasting precious time. It will be an unofficial competition then, declared Forsyth. The honor of achieving the flight will be enough. The money prize can go hang. Come on, let's make tracks. I'll vote we look up the commissioner at his private quarters, suggested Branston. After all, the Golden Hind won't have refilled her petrol tanks yet. Suppose not, growled Forsyth. Someone ineligible signature required for the incident for the indents, I presume. Righto, Brandon. Let's rout out this indispensable. Somewhat to Peter's surprise, the official was discovered with little difficulty. He had finished his lunch, and as the meal had been a satisfying one, he was in high good humor. So Count von Sinzing has 5 hours start, eh? Remarked the worthy representative of the International Air Board. That's nothing. You'll make that up easily. The documents are... Yes, quite so. Unfortunately, the seals are in my office. I'll be along there very shortly. Isn't your signature enough? Asked the baronet. The great one hesitated. On the one hand, he wanted to impress his callers by admitting that his signature was absolutely it. On the other, years of punctilious devotion to the ethics of red tape urged him to depreciate such a cutting of the Gordian knot. No, sir, Regnold, he replied. Both are necessary. One is not conclusive in order without the other. I'll be at the office by 3. It was now 2:15. Thorndyke felt strongly inclined to inquire pointedly why 3/4 of an hour would it take up by the commissioner in getting from his quarters to his office. By 10 minutes past 3, the various documents were sealed and signed. As the competitors were on the point of taking their departure, the commission spoke again. I don't seem to have seen Form 445-6, he observed dryly. That had to be obtained before you left England. It wasn't, replied the baronet bluntly. An oversight, I admit, but you don't suggest that I return to England to get it. It is necessary, was the rejoinder. Without without it, the flight would not be in order. In fact, as an authorized representative of the International Air Board, I can rule you out of the contest. Piffle, declared Forsyth hotly. He was rapidly nearing the end of his restraint. This is, I may observe, is the contest of aircraft, not a paper competition. Form 4456 is not an absolute essential. Since you require it, I presume the case can be met if my representative in England has the form made out and sent to you by registered post. It will be in your hands before the Golden Hind completes the circuit. The commission consulted a ponderous tome, choke and block, with rules and regulations for aerial navigation, written in the official phraseology so confusing that it was possible to have more than one interpretation for at least 75% of the complicated paragraphs. Quoting Article 1071, subsection 3c, the official made the discovery that the rendering of Form 4456 could be dispensed in circumstance laid down in Article 2074, Section 5c, etc., etc. Thereupon he rank and bell summoned a head clerk, who in turn deputed a junior to fetch a certain form. When this was forthcoming, a blob of scaling wax, the impression of a seal, and the great man illegible signature of a trick was done. As far as the International Air Board was concerned, the Golden Hind was recognized and duly authorized competitor for the Chavez Prize. There was still a recognized military authority to be dealt with. That official was urbanely personified. He did everything in his power to expedite matters, but red tape was stronger than gold lace. The loud report of a gun warned Forsyth that his companion, that sunset had descended upon the rock. The gate of the fortress were closed till sunrise. Won't affect you, explained the courteous official. You can get back by the boat of the old mole. I won't keep you very much longer. It really isn't my fault. Gibraltar was one bad choice of mine for a starting point, observed Thorndyke. Afraid so, agreed the other. Ah, here we are. Thank you, Wilson. Where's my fountain pen? Where's... Oh, dash it all. Where's everything? That's settled then. Have a drink before you go. No? Well, cheerio, and the very best of luck. Armed with the necessary documents, sealed, signed, and delivered, Thorndyke Branding found themselves in the open air. Darkness had already fallen. It was a good 2 miles from Little Europa Point to the Old Mole, and not a vehicle or any sort was to be seen. Tired, hot, and hungry, they reached the spot where the naval pinnacle was supposed to be waiting them. It was not there. A message erroneously delivered had sent the boat back to the dockyard. Not to be done. Thorndyke hired a native boat, paying without demur a villainous-looking rock score the excessive sum he demanded. For the quarter of an hour the boat rowed about while the baronet and his companion gazed aloft in the hope of spotting the Golden Hind against the dark sky. She's gone, declared Britzman. Nonsense, exclaimed Thorndyke irritably. Why would she be? Nevertheless, in his mind, he was convinced that such was the case. Presently, the boat ran so close to the buoy to which the airship had been moored. Both men recognized the buoy by the number painted on it. No wire rope ran upward to an invisible object floating in the darkness of night. Unaccountably mysterious, the Golden Hind had disappeared. Chapter 8. Cast Adrift. Enrico Gerard, Spaniard on his father's side, a German on his mother, with a dash of almost every other continental nation's blood in his veins, lived, or rather existed, in a mean dwelling behind the King's Bastion on the west side of Gibraltar. Indolent, thriftless, and easygoing on one hand, crafty and quarrelsome on the other, he possessed all the bad points that characterized the criminal class of two countries where his parents first saw the light. What he did for a living and how he earned money was a mystery even to his polyglot neighbors, yet without being well off, he appeared to always be flush with money. Contrary to the general demur of the rock scorps, Enrico Juarez expressed no astonishment when the Golden Hind appeared over the high ground beyond the Algeciras. He was expecting the airship, although he had been confessed to himself that she had certainly arrived prematurely. Evidently, this was not according to plan. He sat, smoked inaudible cigarettes, and though as deeply as a half-read Spaniard can, twice he got up, yawned, stretched himself, and ambled back to the house to partake of meals consisting primarily of olives, garlic, and mayonnaise. Then back he came to his post of vantage, and sat gazing solidly at 500 feet of inflated gas bags riding easily to her wire cable, while her crew, bringing the airship close to the surface, were busy engaged in pumping up petrol from a tank liner. The shadows were lengthening considerably when a white-robed Moor approached the reclining jars and dignified, all-a-figure man wearing a thick black beard and mustache. The Englishman has stated, observed the newcomer, speaking in Spanish with a decidedly guttural accent. That I know, rejoined Enrico, but not so von Singing, continued the other in a low tone, giving a furtive glance over his shoulder. Until he arrives at Masoa, it is doubtful whether he will know that this English airship is on his heels. Why is she here so soon? I know not, replied Jarvis. 2 men landed from her. They went into the direction of Buena Vista. The pseudo-Moor shrugged his shoulders. 2,500 pesetas are waiting for you in Bangla del Esperanto at Algerina's friends Enrico, he said in a low voice. Prevent that airship departure, even for 12 hours, and the money will be paid you. How can I? Asked Charles, showing more interest than he had hitherto displayed. I cannot place a bomb on board her like I did on board Henry Aretos at Barcelona. Shh, not so loud, exclaimed the others warmly. You can earn the money is your affair. Suppose the Moors passed on, leaving Enrico Jarvis gazed thoughtfully at the British airship. He sat and pondered until the refueling operations were completed and the Golden Hind allowed to rise 100 feet above the sea. With the setting sun, a gentle breeze sprang up from the northeast, causing the hitherto almost motionless ship to sway as fretted at her cables. He waited until darkness had settled upon the scene, then once more made his way into the house. This time he did not eat, but fortified himself with a long drink out of an earthenware bottle. Drawing his knife, he carefully oiled the blade and replaced it in its sheath. Then, having selected a marine spike from a tool box, he slung the implement from his neck by means of a lanyard, hiding it under his colored shirt. These precautions completed, he walked slowly and unconcernedly to the old mole. By this time the waterfront was almost deserted. A petrol marched solidly on the street. and Rico stepped into the shelter of a narrow courtyard until the khaki-clad parties had disappeared. But before he could resume, he had to await the passing of the gaillard and belted naval picket. The coast cleared, and he reached the mole. A tramp steamer and a few freculas were moored alongside. Farther out, a tug was engaged in shepherding a couple of large lighter alongside an eastbound liner, while changing red, white, and green lights beckoned the presence of swift-moving steamboats in the bay. Standing out against the faint starlight, he could discern the Golden Hind. Even as he looked, a gleam of light shot through the window of one of the compartments, and then another, both being almost instantly screened. 2,500 pentaces, whispered Gerard to himself, a good price for a little swim. Without troubling to recover any of his clothes, although he kicked off his canvas shoes, Enrico cautiously descended a flight of steps until his feet touched the water. Listening to assure himself that no one was about, he glided in a noiseless and eel and swam with slow, steady strokes under the counter of the tramp and close to her whale side until he gained her bows. Taking his bearings of the airship's mooring buoy, he resumed his easy progress, cautiously lest further his phosphorescent spray should betray his presence. A quarter of an hour's swim brought him up to the mooring buoy, with considerable difficulty, for the large barrel-shaped buoy was coated with barnacles and slippery with seaweed. Enrico contrived to draw himself out of the water. Again he wanted to listen to the sound emanating from the starship, 150 feet overhead. The wire hawser, acting as a conductor, enabled him to hear with great distinctness the positioning. A good knowledge of English, he was able to pick up scraps of conversation between the crew that helped him but little, for they were talking of matters as remote from topic of the great race as the poles. Enrique Juarez next devoted his attention to the shackles that secured the timbal spliced in the end of the cable to the big ring boat of the buoy. He grunted with satisfaction when he discovered that the shackles were threaded and not secured by a forelock, but at the same time he found by the sense of touch that whoever had been responsible for the job had done his work by well securing the pin by means of a piece of flexible wire. This latter Jarvis managed to cast loose. Then, with the aid of his marine spike, he began to unfasten the shackle pin, pausing occasionally as the strain of the wire rope increased. At last the deed was accomplished. The shackle pin clattered upon the round surface of the buoy and rebounded into the water, but almost simultaneously Enrico Jarvis found himself being whisked aloft. A snap hook at the end of the wire had caught in his belt, and there he was suspended ignoramulously like a horse being hung on board a ship already 150 feet or more above the surface of the sea. His first impulse was to cut loose his belt and drop, but a downward glance at the dark, unfathomable void made him absurdly change his mind. His sole thought was now that of the self-preservation. Fearful lest his leather belt should break and send him hurtling through the space, he clung desperately to the wire. Facts below him, the lights of Gibraltar seemed to be gliding past, and freed airship drifted toward the strait separating Europe from the African shore. It was bitterly cold aloft. The keenness of the rarefied air was intensified by the fact that his clothes were saturated with salt water. Numbing pain crept down both his arms. His muscles seemed to be cracking under the strain, while his fingers closed round the wire until his nails sunk deep into his palm. He shouted for help. His voice sounded more like the yelp of a jackal than that of a human being, but no response came from the airship. 100 feet above him. Dios, he exclaimed in agony, this is indeed the end. The next chapter is chapter 6, The Escape of Enrico Jarvis. I will be reading that tomorrow. I'm going to try to stream earlier in the day, probably around 3 or sometime between 3 or 5 p.m. Eastern time, and then at night we're gonna finally continue Half-Life 2. So I want to thank everyone for coming out. See everyone tomorrow. Bye bye.